All right. Welcome all in, everyone, for a Saturday morning edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. There is a ton of basketball on the docket today. 9 WCC teams in action. And then a 10th is actually going to be in action tomorrow. We're going to talk about that game. That's USF and Loyola. But we'll also kind of dive into some other news that's happened over the course of the last few days. Of course, there's the WCC suing Grand Canyon for uh, the fees that which the exit fees and the realignment, all the realignment fees that were not paid. So we'll get into touch on that a little bit. Also, we'll touch on the movement from the Mountain West Conference and adding a kind of a head scratcher in UC Davis. If you haven't heard that, they will be adding UC Davis for all sports except football, which kind of, again, makes it even more of a head scratcher, but we'll get into that later on in the episode. But this is, we're going to focus on all of the actual basketball taking place on the court today. And as I mentioned, 9 of the 11 WCC teams are in action. It's We have Northern Arizona at Pepperdine. Santa Clara will be hosting Bradley. Washington State taking on Missouri State. Oregon State hosting undefeated UC Irvine. Obviously, a big opportunity there. San Diego will be taking on Fresno State, heading to the Valley. Gonzaga and UConn obviously are the big contest of the day. That's going to be at Madison Square Garden in New York. So great opportunity for the Zags to be in that environment. That's going to be a heavy UConn crowd, and of course they get to see their one of their favorite guys, Aiden Mahaney, one more time in that one. St. Mary's with a big one as well, as they will be in Idaho Falls to take on Boise State, second year in a row. The Gales will be taking on Boise in that location. Prairie View at LMU, and then Pacific at UNLV to cap off the night. And then, of course, tomorrow, as I mentioned, the Dons will be taking on Loyola in Milwaukee as part of a multi-team event there. But they're only playing one game as part of that event. There's 3 games at in Milwaukee on that day, and the Dons will be taking on an undefeated Ramblers team in that one. Okay, so let's kind of get to the kind of key matchups on this day, and I kind of I'm slotting them into three three buckets generally: teams that need a win, teams that are desperate for a win, and teams that it would be nice if they got one. And I'm going to start with the teams that need a win. Now, I talked earlier in the week with bracketologist Rocco Miller, and we were discussing a lot about where each of these teams are, those who have tournament hopes still alive, and who's put themselves up well so far, who set themselves up, and then who maybe has more work to do to kind of solidify that resume. Obviously, once again, WCC play that will determine quite a bit as well. But what can some of these teams still do in the next week and a half to solidify all of what they've done to this point and make sure that going in they are going to be in the conversation for an at-large bid. So let's we'll start there and talk about the teams who kind of need a win in this one. Teams that need a win going into Saturday, and games that are going to help them out. I'm not going to really focus on like well, Pepperdine needs wins, or like Pacific needs to win. It's like teams that are in the tournament conversation. And starting off with Oregon State and UC Irvine, this definitely qualifies as a game that is a need a win. Oregon State has done a really good job to this point of taking care of teams that are not on their level. They've absolutely destroyed teams outside of their best 2 opponents. Like they're 6-2 at this point, but they do not have a marquee win. They do not have a win against a top 100 team. So looking at Oregon State, they lost by 3 to Oregon. They lost by 3 at North Texas. Again, both of those squads are really good. Like Oregon, up until just this past week, was undefeated. North Texas is a really good mid-major team, especially having to take them on the road at the Super Pit. But the bottom line is Oregon State has yet to actually get one of those wins that is going to at least draw a lot of attention for the committee or any of the metrics, because some of the metrics have them a little higher, the net. Some of the metrics have them a little lower. So Ken Palm and Bartovik have them a little bit further down the road. So they need a win. And this UC Irvine team is going to present a really good challenge for them. This is another really good defensive team in the Anteaters. They're 9-0 coming into this contest. They are 54 in Ken Palm. They're sixth in adjusted defensive rank, according to Ken Palm. They are ninth in the NCAA in opponents' field goal percentage. They're right there as well in points per game at 59.6 per contest. So this is going to really feels like a first to 60 wins, because Oregon State has also done a really good job defensively. They are 10th in the NCAA in opponents' field goal percentage at 37%. They allow even fewer points than UC Irvine at 58.6. And we can talk a lot about like, oh, like, well, neither of them have really played anybody. So for both of these teams, this is actually a very good opportunity for either of them to pick up a really good win. For Oregon State, again, like this is a Ken Palm 54 team. It won't be a quad one, but this is an opportunity for a quad two victory. Irvine is going to be the favorite going uh, into the Big West Conference play. So that's a team that is going to continue to improve, not necessarily improve a ton, but they've done a lot in the non-conference to show that they are going to be right in that ballpark of like the 40s to 60 range all season long. I don't see them really kind of falling off the map. They've done a really good job to this point, and Irvine obviously has been one of the better mid majors over the last few seasons. And this is going to be Oregon State's bet. Not necessarily that this is they're going to be their best team to date, because obviously the Oregon squad is the better team, but this is now maybe the best opportunity left on their schedule. After this tournament, after this game, they will be heading off to the Diamond Head Classic, and that is the last opportunity for some important games, some games that are going to give them great opportunities for wins. But even that, it's not a ton. They'll have Charleston in the opener, and then they hope, if things all play out the way they want, that it's going to be someone like Loyola. Now, again, that Loyola team might look a little different by the time they see them, depending on what happens with USF tomorrow. But Oregon State has to be able to get out of the gate pretty early in this one. They have to get this one. This is essentially a must win for any level of at large consideration. If they don't, it will put major pressure not only on the Diamond Head, but it'll also put major pressure on what they have to do in WCC play. It would then put immense pressure on them to have to be able to beat Washington State, to beat USF, to beat St. Mary's, to beat Gonzaga. And those are going to be taller tasks that I think many think that might be. Again, like Oregon State, like coming in, they came in what I think was like sixth or seventh was the preseason polls where they were slotted, which felt about right. And as of right now, that still feels about right. Now we can talk about Santa Clara and how they've slipped and everything else, sure, but Washington State, USF, St. Mary's, Gonzaga have all really separated themselves from, I feel like, the rest of the pack. But a game like this would really help Oregon State kind of get back into that conversation, get back into what might be the outskirts of an at-large resume that's going to get them back to the NCAA tournament. For OSU and for Washington State, I think this is something to recognize, as this is maybe a new set of circumstances that you're used to, that usually there's a lot of opportunities in conference to kind of bolster that resume up, because most of the conference, almost the entire conference you were used to being in, is also maybe like top 150 or whatnot, right in that range. You do have at least a third of the league down in the 200s, so you have fewer opportunities to really regain some of what you've lost. And this UC Irvine game becomes critical if the Beavers are going to get back into the hunt and get back into that conversation. You just need a win. And that's kind of like that the main message there is that is a team that needs a win, and this is a must win for them. Another one who I would say is in the need to win category is going to be tomorrow on Sunday, and that's USF. They need a win. USF is going into a game against Loyola where they have one marquee win, and that's Boise State. Obviously, that was a great way within the first week and a half of the season to get started to show, hey, this might be a different USF team than we've seen in the past. They can close out games, they can get these wins against good opponents. Now, since that game, they have lost obviously a tough one against Memphis. They got they were with Clemson for a half, and then the Tigers ran away. They did beat St. Louis, but St. Louis is maybe not the team we all thought, mainly because of injuries. But all that said is they've kind of slipped a little further than I think many thought they would. So the Dons are in a scenario where they're 1-2 against teams in the top 100. And it's starting to look a bit similar to what we saw a year ago. And for me, what has been a bit concerning is that in those games, especially the last two, the Clemson game and then also Boise State, or not Boise State, in the Memphis game, is that the only one guy has really seemed to step up in these games, and that has been Malik Thomas. He had 25 in the Memphis game. He had 14 in the Clemson game. Obviously, like they only scored 55 total in that game, so that number was going to be lower. But he was the leading scorer in both of those contests, and we didn't see maybe some of the main characters that we thought would be able to step up in these contests. I think this is a team that needs Marcus Williams to play a big role in this game. They need Guido Newberry to, and again, like for Newberry, I think it's not just offensively. He can be obviously a huge impact defensively, and he needs to contribute heavily in one way or the other in that contest. They need someone else other than Malik Thomas to come along for the ride in these games. And that I think has been the challenge. Defensively, I think that the Dons have done a really good job in both of these contests of slowing Memphis down, defending the three. They did an okay job against Clemson, even though that was a team that really kind of took control of the boards, and we hadn't seen that too often against USF. But this is a similar pattern to what we saw a year ago. Can they get off the mat against good teams? Can they get these wins against these tough opponents? And Loyola is going to create another one of those opportunities. And as we talked about it, with Rocco Miller earlier in the week, USF is further away resume wise, in his opinion, than Washington State is. And the Dons need to figure out a way, need to get another win or two that's going to help bolster their chances. The Loyola game feels like they need a win this one. They're not desperate for a win in this contest, but this is a game that they need to get. I think they should get, and if they do that on a neutral site in what is going to be a pretty hostile crowd toward them, because Loyola, obviously, they're down in Chicago, so that's a quick drive up, just up the road to Milwaukee. But USF needs to go into WCC play with a little bit more of that resume set up, because we know where Gonzaga, from where they were a year ago, is better than where they were. St. Mary's is St. Mary's, and USF has always kind of had a tough time with them. Washington State's going to be no pushover for this team, for anybody really, and regardless of whether Cedric Howard is there or not. Like, they have proven that they are going to be a tough out for anyone. Oregon State has played really good defensively. So again, like there's some opportunities for USF, but you have to make sure you've taken care of what you can in non-conference. If they get two of these wins, again, you get Loyola, you have Boise State on your resume as wins. Sure, you lose to Memphis, you lose to Clemson, but at the very least, now you have a little bit more energy, a little bit more momentum going in, and are not as desperate to get those other marquee games in WCC play. Although I will say, I do think that the Dons are going to have to get at least one from St. Mary's, one from Gonzaga. Not to say one and, but they are going to have to get something out of those something out of the matchups with the Gales and with the Bulldogs when those come up later in the year. Now now one team I'm looking at, I'm going to kind of gloss over Washington State. I don't think they're not really in this conversation to me, mainly because the matchup with Missouri State is a game that they should get. The one thing I will say about Washington State is that we talked about how resume wise you they look maybe a little bit better than USF, but the metrics don't like Washington State as much as they like USF. And part of the reason why, and take this for what it is that they don't have the vanity win. They don't have the blowout win by 30. They don't have the blowout win by 40. And they kind of need one of those to help just shoot them up the ranks because that's kind of how USF has done it. They've had a few games where they've won by 30, won by 40, and guess what? That has really helped them in some of those key metrics. And because you can't, not everyone's going to watch every single game and everything else, these metrics do matter. So Washington State does have an opportunity to maybe get out and get a blowout win here. Now, Missouri State's not going to be a pushover, but this is also a team that the way the Cougs have been playing recently, they can absolutely get this one and maybe run away from them in this contest. Just taking a look at the spread on this one, they are a 10.5 point favorite to beat uh, to to beat Missouri State. So there is space here. I do think that they're going to do a lot. It I This is going to be a game where they need to actually get out and run. They need to get out and show what their offense can do, but they need that defense to come along for the ride. Like it can't be closer to what the Portland State game was. It can't be closer to what maybe some of the other contests have been to this point. They are going to need to separate themselves in this one to help the vanity metrics. I think they're in no danger of losing this contest, but this is one where they can absolutely uh, win with some style points, and they need it for all of the numbers that are going to help them kind of get back up. In addition to obviously their wins against Nevada, against Boise State, against a one-loss Bradley team whose only loss is to the Cougars. So now thinking about teams that are going to be desperate for a win. And I think there's only one that falls into the category this week as desperate. And that's Santa Clara. Santa Clara, as we know, we talked about a lot over the last few weeks, is the missed opportunities that they have had, that they should not have lost to North Dakota State at home. They should not have lost to Stanford at home. They had opportunities to beat Washington late in that game at the Acrisure Invitational. They've had chances to get some good wins, and they have failed to do so. I will say the one note on North Dakota State, as we've seen over the last week, maybe they are not nearly as bad as we all thought they were, as they have started to climb up. And I think last I looked, they were like 126 in Ken Palm. So initially, it might have looked really bad because of name and everything else. Now it's still a bad loss at home. That's still going to be qualified, I think, as a quad 3 loss at the Levy Center. But it's giving you at least some level of sense that maybe they're not as bad, but Santa Clara still needs to pick up the pace. They're still 5-5. The bottom line is like they have a win against St. Louis. Cool. They have a win against TCU. Good. They have some good, but they also have bad. And at 5-5, we know that they're very much on the outside looking in. We know that they're going to have to be near perfect from here on out if they're going to get back into the NCAA tournament conversation. And a win against a Bradley team in Santa Clara is going to be a critical game. This is a Bradley team that has played very well. They are as I mentioned, 8-1. That one loss does come to Washington State. And that also was a road game for Bradley. So this is a great opportunity for Santa Clara to kind of get back into it, because this Bradley team is 66 at Ken Palm. They're 53 in the net. This is a quality quad 2 game. And This is a team that was picked to win the Missouri Valley. They have looked the part at this stage, but Santa Clara is going to need to do a lot on the defensive end. And this is one of the challenges that they have continued to have all year long is can they get consistent enough play on the defensive end to really keep them in some of these ball games? And they're going to have to defend that perimeter really well because one thing Bradley does well is shoot. Duke Dean, who was the preseason pick for player of the year, 13.8 points per game, 41% from three. Zach Montgomery, I should say, he's been shooting 58% from three on the season. So, and then also Almar also Atlison, just making sure I pronounce that properly. 44% from three for him as well. Santa Clara is going to be tested a lot on the perimeter. They're going to need to be able to do something on that front. They're going to need to play better defensively. They're going to need something out of Adama Ball. Like I'm still confused at how we have not seen more out of him through the course of the season. We know that Elijah Mahi has been one of their best, if not their best player to this point in the season, which obviously has been a great lift, but they need somebody else to kind of step up on a regular basis. Carlos Stewart obviously has been really good as of late. So that's one component that we're starting to see. I think we're starting to see at least some better bench play out of them as well, which was another concern for this team. And but Santa Clara going into this one desperate for a win. This is a team that needs it. They're a team that can afford no more. Really, they can afford no more losses moving this way out. Now, once they get the conference play, that's different. Once they get into WCC play, sure, they can go ahead and play St. Mary's and lose those games, Gonzaga, whatever. But they have to clean house against everybody else. No more losses to San Diego, no losses to LMU, no losses to Pepperdine, no losses to Portland. You're going to have to take care of business against Washington State, Oregon State. Now they are probably going to have to beat St. Mary's at least once. They're probably going to have to play Gonzaga and beat Gonzaga maybe once. And this is maybe where it's like, okay, maybe the task is too tall. Maybe it's not actually going to do it for Santa Clara this year, even though there was wild expectations of what they could have been. This is a desperate situation for them. It's desperational the rest of the season. And we'll see if the Broncos rise to that occasion or we'll start to see them fall flat, unfortunately, as we have seen them do so far this season. Now I get into the would be nice category. And I'm going to qualify this because the two would be nices belong to St. Mary's and Gonzaga, but the would be nices also have the qualifier is expectation. For Gonzaga, as the example, they go into this game against UConn on the road at Madison Square Garden against the back-to-back national champion, against the team that beat them a year ago in the battle in Seattle. A team that they want some level of revenge on. The team that they lost to also 2 years ago in the NCAA tournament. So the Zags have a lot of motivation to want to beat this UConn team, albeit it's not the same group of guys. But here's where the would be nice starts to border on need for them. They have been playing well. We know that they're 7-2. They have some good wins, but they also have two close losses in critical situations. They did not play well down the stretch against West Virginia. They did not play well down the stretch against Kentucky. If we see something similar happen in this game, and it's not quite hitting the panic button, but you lose this game and the pressure of getting a 1 or getting a 2 becomes incredibly tough if you cannot get the game against UConn because now that puts a lot more pressure on the game against UCLA next week at the Intuit Dome. That now becomes a must win if you're looking at a 1 or a 2 seed, which a lot of people thought that that's where they would be going into the season. A loss here or even a loss against UCLA puts that possibility in jeopardy. So they could end up being a 3. They could end up being a 4. Now, maybe not a 4. I think to me, worst case scenario is that Gonzaga will end up a 3 seed. Uh, and that would still probably put them playing in Seattle in the first couple rounds of the tournament. Who knows if that would still put them in the West Regional, but at the very least, they'd be playing in Seattle. But it is bordering on need. It's right now, it is a would be nice because if they get this win, it is another feather in their cap. It's another great win for the Zags. They will have wins over the likes of Davidson. They'll have wins over Baylor. They have wins over Arizona State. You'll add UConn to that list. They have good wins. There's no doubt about that. We're starting to nitpick on what seed line would they be at if they win this game, win that game, whatever else. Because if UConn starts to play like we maybe think they can, that's a team that's also going to contend for a 2 or a 3 seed. You look at some of the other teams that they have played, they are also going to contend for some of those spots. Kentucky's going to contend for one of those spots. The way they have played has obviously they've played really well. They have a game against Louisville on Saturday, and of course, like once again, the SEC play kind of all bets are off because the SEC has been an absolute has been absolutely on fire and to this point in the non-conference. Would it be nice? It's a would be nice. This is based on the expectations because this squad had while still struggles down the stretch, there's still a lot of good to look at what Gonzaga has done. They have obviously the best point guard in the country in Ryan Nembhard. When Graham Ike can stay healthy, when Graham Ike can stay on the floor and out of foul trouble, he remains one of the better big men in the country. The 28-11 against Kentucky last week is proof of that. Even if he's not on the floor, Braden Huff has been one of the best reserves in the country, if not the best reserve in the country. But the perimeter defense in this one is going to be critical. UConn is going to try to. They have a lot of really good three-point shooters. You look at Solo Ball, you look at Alex Caravan, you look at Liam McNeely, who's played well in spots through this course of the non-conference. Of course, they have Aiden Mahaney, who Gonzaga fans are all too familiar with, which while he has largely been in the doghouse for the Huskies, it is very possible that he sees red against the Zags and drops the 20 plus points, which we're very accustomed to seeing that happen against that squad. But really, this is coming down to the guards for me. Like this is a matter of can Nolan Hickman, Caleb Battle, and Ryan Nembhard really protect that perimeter. If they can keep UConn off the 3-point line and make it life difficult, Michael Ajayi, I'm going to throw him into this mix as well. Dusty Stromer, defensively on the perimeter, force them off the line, and I think that this is you have a much better chance against this UConn squad. Keeping Graham Ike out of foul trouble is critical in this one. If they can do that, they're going to stand a much better chance. I do like Gonzaga in this game just based on their depth and their consistency. And we've seen just wild inconsistencies with UConn to this point. So this game going in would be nice for Gonzaga. I do think they're going to get it. But if they do lose this contest, it is going to start bordering on need going into the UCLA game. Because if you slip there, and if you already lost to UConn, a 4-loss Gonzaga team going into WCC play is probably looking closer to being a 3 or a 4 and the shot at a 1 or a 2 probably has slipped away. So the other would be nice is St. Mary's. And I know a lot, as I've had conversations with St. Mary's folks and everything else, is that there definitely some concerns over the fact that they have let leads slip away against Arizona State, against UTSA, and against Utah. All three, we have seen leads slip away from this squad. And in 2 of the 3, they've at least figured out how to get it done. They have figured out a way to still get a win. And the bottom line is they are 9-1. And and going into Boise, a place where they lost a year ago, a place where they obviously are going to seek some level of revenge for the game last season, they come into this game in a much better position than they were a year ago. They they were really struggling when they had to make the trip to Idaho last season. This is on kind of like that same window where they lost 3 in a row. They were not looking great, and it took a game. And this was kind of the turning point game in a way where you started to see them do some things well before they played Colorado State that following week and got a big win in that one. So St. Mary's obviously like had a great performance just the other night from Paulos Morauskas. He had 29 points, 7 rebounds. He was great in that game in the second half. Um, a much needed lift because like St. Mary's really was struggling to find another option for them in that one. And and right now they've actually picked up at least a few wins that are going to help them resume wise. Like you already look at they've beaten Nebraska, they have beaten USC, and they have beaten Utah. They have beaten 3 Power 4 squads. They go in, yes, they have the loss to ASU, but it's only by 4. I think that's like kind of overlooked in the fact that yes, they did lose that game. Yes, they probably should have won that game. But that was a game last year where they probably lose that by 10, 15, and they lost it by 4 in a very competitive game. And go into Boise with a chance to really kind of solidify, whatever you want to say, that this is a team that's going not only going to be back in the tournament, but is going to make noise, potentially could make noise given the right matchup in the NCAA tournament. Because winning down the stretch is a part of part of what you have to do, obviously, in the tournament. And yes, you'll be facing much higher quality opponents than maybe what they've seen to this point, but you got to learn it now so that by the time you get to those games later in the year, it makes more sense. And it's something you've experienced before and you're not rattled by the scenario. A 9-1 St. Mary's team going into Boise. Boise is 6-3. So again, this is going to be another really good game. This was a Boise team that was picked to win the Mountain West, but they have struggled a bit as of late. They've lost 2 of 3. The one win they had, they nearly lost to South Dakota. They lost to Washington State last Saturday. It ended up only being by 5, but they were down by 20 at one point in that contest. I was at a pregame for the St. Mary's Utah game, and I was just had it on my phone, and just my eyes bugged out of my head seeing them be down by 20. So this Boise State team is in a little bit of a funk, and their opponent's field goal percentage, like their defense, is kind of indicative of that. They're allowing teams to shoot 47% from the field. On the season, it's 42. And on the flip side, St. Mary's has been doing a much better job on the defensive end. I think early on there was some concern about how they were playing defensively early on, but now they're starting to look like that staunch defensive team that we're so used to seeing from a Randy Bennett team. They're allowing opponents to only shoot 36% from the field. Only one has been better than 40 in that stretch. So this would be nice game for St. Mary's. They don't actually need this game. Now, I think they absolutely get this game. I think that they do go into it, I believe, as the favorite. Let me just take a quick look at the line. Yeah, St. Mary's goes in as a 2.5-point favorite in that contest. So that does show that thinking of last week's game where they were actually the underdog to Utah, clearly the thoughts have changed on St. Mary's that they are playing well right now, and that's going to continue as they have 2 more really good opportunities to add to the resume. And this is, again, resume building. They've done the work, I think, to solidify, assuming no major setbacks, that they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. Boise raises that profile. They get a win against Utah State next week, that raises the profile. We heard it from Rocco just the other day. Like, he says he still thinks they're a 5 or a 6 seed, which to me, I was shocked by. I did not think that there was that sentiment out there that metrically what they've done to this point, that assuming they take care of business like they normally do, they're going to be a 5 or 6 seed again. And He's on board. That's exactly who they are. And that's exactly what we're going to see the rest of the season. This is going to be a team back in a similar position as we saw a year ago. And they don't need to win the WCC to secure that 5 or 6 seed, which was again one of those other things I was thinking about. It's like, well, they won the league last year, but they also didn't get off to a good start. They needed to win the league to be a 5 seed, to be a 6 seed. They don't need to do that this year because they put in the work and have gotten the wins in the non-conference. That said, I still personally think they do need to get one of the next two, the Boise or Utah State games, to kind of solidify that component. If they go into the non-conference and they have 2 losses, let's say, and the 2 losses are Arizona State, and for the sake of argument, let's say it's Boise, they have put themselves in a very good position for their resume going into conference play. And honestly, like, I do still like their chances at least getting one of the games from Gonzaga, which obviously will help raise the profile as well. So St. Mary's falls into for this week, a would be nice win against Boise State. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with a couple of items that I know have been floating around because of realignment and everything else. And I'm going to start with the Mountain West coming out and adding the head scratcher that I thought it was in UC Davis. And they are adding Davis for all their sponsored sports except for football. And I'm still trying to figure out how this benefits the Mountain West in any way. Because on a basketball front, they're okay. They're a solid program, but they've only made the tournament once in the last 6 years. This is a squad that in the Big West really hasn't made a ton of noise. And in the other revenue generating sport, they have not moved the needle. So I'm curious as to why this is happening. The only thing I can think that is making some level of sense is that they are pocketing this program and they're pocketing Davis for the eventual move to FBS for the football program. Davis is one of the better FCS programs in the country. They have continually been one of those programs, but the facilities need to be upgraded. The financial investment in football needs to be there. And it is kind of funny that a lot of the noise was about Sacramento State, and we haven't heard a word about them. We didn't hear a word about Davis being involved in any of these realignment talks at all. So this came as like a heavy shocker that it was Davis of all teams that got the invite and everything else. Now, what does that necessarily mean otherwise? Obviously, it means the Big West loses a team and they're down the 9. But what does it mean as far as like the other invites? Of like, you would think that if you're looking at who's going to raise your profile as a league and you're thinking about basketball, how did Davis enter into that equation, but not St. Mary's, not USF, not Santa Clara? And I know that can be said to like, well, and if you look at the endowment, you look at student body size and everything else, Davis obviously makes a lot more sense than any of those three. Fair. But if you're trying to make a better basketball league and you're looking at the revenue that can be drawn from TV and whatnot on that front, I don't know how Davis makes a whole lot of sense when they don't move the needle at all. And they haven't had basketball success on a significant level. The Davis move just confuses me. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, can the WCC maybe take advantage of that? I don't know. Now, I kind of threw it out there of just like a harebrained idea, not really that there's anything behind it or whatever else. If the WCC knows it's losing Gonzaga, it's losing Oregon State, it's losing Washington State, Grand Canyon, who we'll get to in a little bit, has already walked out the door, never got in. Seattle's coming in. You need a way to kind of raise up the profile of this league again. You need another way. And who is that? Well, you're not, the Mountain West teams are out the equation. We've talked a lot about maybe Cal Baptist as one of those teams, which always kind of made a lot of sense in one way, shape, or form. But you know what? trying to just think outside the box and just start to throw things at the wall. What if you go raid some of the top of the Big West? We talked earlier about UC Irvine. What about UC Santa Barbara? About UC San Diego? All of these teams are top 120 teams, and they're doing this out of the Big West. Now, I would make the argument that if you take those three, you add them to the St. Mary's, yeah, add them to St. Mary's, San Francisco, Santa Clara, LMU. Now you've actually added some level of significant depth to this league that did not exist before. This You're starting to raise them up because again, even the lower end of the Big West is much like the lower end of the WCC. But I'd argue that the top half of the WCC is what makes that more attractive to add teams like Irvine, Santa Barbara, and or UC San Diego, because not only do they bring again larger school size and everything else, but there's clear investment in the basketball programs at each of those schools, and additionally, you would add some pretty good Olympic sports, non-revenue sports into that equation as well, as all three of those schools have been very good in a lot of other sports, not just basketball. Again, just throwing things at the wall, just seeing if that would actually if that if that would do anything, because I do think the WCC can't just assume defeat at this stage and just stand pat with the 9 that they will have after this wave of realignment would be over in 2 years. Now, speaking of realignment and all of that, there was news from the WCC just the other day involving their recently leaving, but recently added, but then recently left member Grand Canyon. And we know that this is a school that has been embattled in a lot of legal actions over the last few years, and it will not be ending anytime soon. As the WCC announced that they will be suing the Grand Canyon because they failed to actually pay exit fees and whatnot. And I'll read the statement from the WCC. Quote, the West Coast Conference filed a breach of contract lawsuit against Grand Canyon University today in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. The lawsuit is the result of GCU's refusal to satisfy and then deny its financial obligation in regards to substantial amounts owed to the conference in both entrance and withdrawal fees. Each were due within 30 days of its withdrawal notice. I'll read the response from GCU. Quote, we appreciated the invitation to join the West Coast Conference and were disappointed to learn yesterday through a WCC social media post that a lawsuit has been filed against us containing incomplete and incorrect allegations. We understand the disappointment in our decision to ultimately decline the WCC's invitation, and we empathize with their circumstances after losing prominent members such as BYU and Gonzaga recently. GCU was not scheduled to become a member of the WCC until July 1st, 2025, and the WCC's claims that GCU has, quote, withdrawn from the WCC or breached any contractual obligation are inaccurate. We look forward to presenting our case in court. So regardless of the statements or whatnot, this really does come down to obviously what was the actual agreement in what Grand Canyon signed and what the WCC presented. What were the actual terms? What fees were due and what was the actual timeline? What truly counts as a withdrawal from the league? Did GCU actually sign this thing? There's still obviously a lot of legal questions that are going to have to be answered, and I'm no lawyer, so I'm not going to dive into any of that. I will say though, that's like GCU ends up in a lot of these sorts of situations, and it's not for nothing. There's no way that if a school that is involved in this many different lawsuits, that there is not something fishy, schemy going on with this place. And looking at the terms, looking at everything, it's like, who knows? Like a lot of times like this ends up being renegotiated and they'll figure out ways to like knock down The entrance fee, exit fee, the fact that they never actually stepped foot in the WCC, I think is something to be said. The fact that they didn't show to any meetings might actually help GCU's case. But obviously, like I'd imagine they're going to try to find some way to negotiate this without ever actually getting it to court. But obviously, TBD on what we're going to see through the rest of this ordeal between the WCC and Grand Canyon, but probably not done anytime soon. All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Saturday morning live edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Again, nine games today, another 10th tomorrow. A lot of great basketball going on. It will tip off at 1 o'clock. Pepperdine in Northern Arizona are the first game, but the big ones, obviously, later on. Oregon State and Irvine at 2 o'clock, Gonzaga, UConn at 5, and then St. Mary's and Boise at 6 are the three big ones on Saturday, and then USF Loyola tomorrow. Tomorrow at that one is at 3:30 Pacific. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody, for hanging out. We will be back early in the week to kind of recap everything and then look forward to what we're going to see as we get closer and closer to WCC play. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.